man who needs no introduction.
The Black Information Network is committed to bringing you up-to-the-date news stories that are relevant, informative, and inspiring. And while news stories are always being updated and others are breaking, we understand that you need to be in the know all week long. Welcome to your Midweek Memo on the Black Information Network Daily Podcast with me, your host, Ramses Ja. All right, in this week's Midweek Memo, we have an exclusive with our very own Morgyn Wood, who is on the scene all week live from the Democratic National Convention at the United Center in Chicago, Illinois. Welcome to the show, Morgyn. How you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm glad to be on the show. Glad to be in Chicago, repping for the BIN.
Indeed.
The Black Information Network. Yeah, it's a big deal, the Democratic National Convention. So yeah, I'm happy to be here.
All right. And I know we're going to hear more, but this is the Midweek Memo, so we're going to get folks all caught up to today in terms of what's going on there. So I know things kicked off with Joe Biden on the first night and him giving a tearful goodbye. You know, he was crying toward the end there. A 5-decade-long career. He began as the country's youngest senator, and now he ends his career as the oldest president that we've ever had in the country. So again, a lifetime of service.
Right.
Give us some insight into, maybe some highlights, some things that were memorable, what people are talking about on the ground in terms of, at least what took place on Monday.
So yeah, with Biden, people are, it's kind of like it's a bittersweet thing because there's a lot of energy surrounding the ticket, the Harris-Walz ticket. There's a lot of enthusiasm around that ticket, but also there's a lot of respect for the fact that Biden decided to, step down. It was a big decision, and it's one that comes not, for yourself, but for the bigger picture and then in the American people. And I can certainly respect that. I'm sure it was tough because he did mention in his speech that it was the honor of his lifetime to be president. And I'm sure he would have loved to have served another term, but he understood that it's not about him. Yeah. And it is about the bigger picture, the American people. And he heard the call of his party, the Democratic Party, called him to step down and get some younger, new leadership in there. And he certainly had no problem passing the torch to his vice president, obviously, and expecting that she would lead the charge and saying that she's qualified and fit to run the country. So sure. Very much a bittersweet moment. People were very thankful of Joe. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Joe. Chants were going throughout the arena, things like that. He had a little bit of energy in his speech, so that was cool. Of course, he talked about Donald Trump. He had to get in there and jab him a few times before he left out. But yeah, it was really cool, seeing Biden speak on the first night. And that's pretty much unheard of. Also, Vice President Kamala Harris, she made an appearance and opened that, which is something that is usually not done. The presidential nominee usually does not speak until they are ready to accept the nomination. So sure. The fact that they were able to have that exchange on stage and things like that, it was nice to see.
Yeah. And then I caught wind that right after Joe Biden was done speaking, he caught a flight and him and his wife went on vacation. And
he said, you know what?
Yeah,
y'all got it.
Yeah, you got it from here. Yeah, man. So, one of the interesting things about that is that obviously there's some people that have been critical of Joe Biden's administration, and rightfully so. There's nobody that's going to do that job that gets out of the office free from having their fair share of criticisms. But yeah, in a moment like this where he's kind of putting a bow on it, the fact that the general reception from his party was that, his announcement was well received, his career. When people look back on the highlights of his career and the length of the service that he's provided to the country.
Absolutely.
It's more positive than negative. I recognize, and we'll get to, all the protesters and all that sort of stuff. And then obviously there's the conservative critiques of Joe Biden's administration as well. But, when you've given that much of your life to any one thing, you're not going to get out of it free from, controversy or criticisms. Right. And so the fact that they've been able to, and the truth is he can look on his career and say, you know what, I did the best that I could for as long as I could. And, you know, toward the end, I suspect it was, as you mentioned, more like his party and more the donors that kind of forced his hand there. But the fact that he took that and turned it into sort of a best case scenario. It's not a new administration. It's, you know, there's a lot of things that will continue because he rather endorsed his own vice president. Granted, she's going to change a lot of things, you know, let her tell it. But for the most part, he said that she's
not going to deviate from some of the policies. But I also do believe, to your point, that she will tweak. You know, we're not going to do too much. We'll tweak some things. Yeah.
Exactly.
But, and if I may, Ramses, just jump in and say that, you know, being a White House correspondent for iHeart and the Black Information Network, and this being my first administration serving, it's been very fascinating to watch the 4 years that the Biden-Harris administration has served in the White House and in that capacity. And then watching, you know, the growth and what they have accomplished. And it's just been amazing from a journalistic perspective to just see the different ticket items that they've checked off, that the things that they said that they were going to do, whether that be student loan forgiveness. And I know a lot of people are like, I didn't get my student loans forgiven. But there are a lot of people who did, you know, there are a lot of people who benefited from that. Also HBCU, the HBCU funding, you know, and just the awareness around HBCUs. I mean, now a lot more children who may not have wanted to go to college, they might be looking at HBCUs. And now that those HBCUs have some funding behind them, you know, they can cater to the future in terms of, you know, education. So there are things. And then, of course, the Office of Gun Violence and Prevention, I believe that started under the Biden-Harris campaign. So a lot of people who are vying for, you know, reform when it comes to guns and things of that nature. It's just nice to see that from the beginning, you say you're going to do these things and these things have been checked off. Another thing that really strikes me on a personal note, because it was my first visit to the White House, was the Juneteenth proclamation. And I'll get into who I spoke with Opal Lee last night, the mother of Juneteenth. And so to know that you go from the Juneteenth proclamation and then the very next year, you're celebrating Juneteenth on the White House lawn with a concert is just an amazing thing to see. And to have covered this administration as a journalist has just been phenomenal for me. I've been like very fascinated, and I've been bitten by the political bug. And here I am. So talking to you about it.
Okay. All right. That's what we like. Okay. So obviously there were more goings on at the DNC. I'm going to just rattle off some of the better known speakers, but this is in no way an exhaustive list because there's been a lot of phenomenal speakers. But, you know, I want to just kind of gloss over these names and, you know, just anything that stands out as memorable, you know, you being on the ground there. I know that AOC was a fiery speaker. Raphael Warnock was there, and he electrified the crowd. Yeah,
he took them to church.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. Jasmine Crockett. I know how she is, so I already know she did her thing.
Queen.
Exactly. Yeah. Hillary Clinton was there as well, and obviously there's a lot that she had to say. Her being kind of the person that lost to Donald Trump initially, and she was supposed to be, you know, our first female president, and now kind of her endorsing Kamala Harris, saying, you know, effectually communicating like we know what we're up against and we can get it right this time, and she's the right person for that. I thought that again effectually was a really strong message coming from a really powerful person, well positioned to offer that sort of endorsement. The second night, of course, the highlight, Michelle Obama.
Oh my gosh.
And you know, Barack made a joke that he had to follow up with her. He was the only person stupid enough to follow Michelle Obama on the stage. And then of course Bernie Sanders and on and on. So yeah, just talk to us about some of the things that stand out in your mind, having witnessed a lot of these speakers.
Yeah, let me rewind to Monday. So AOC, like you mentioned, had a very fiery speech. Jasmine Crockett, she gave me all the feels. You know, she talked about how Harris wiped her tears one day, and she basically felt like, you know, there was a time where she felt like she couldn't move forward, but now she's the clapback queen. She's gone viral, and you never know what type of impact you have on somebody, and to know that someone like the vice president can pull you to the side and say, I see you, what's wrong with you, and don't worry about that, I got your back. And you actually feel, you feel it. And the fact that Jasmine Crockett cried on that stage, I was just like really moved by that. Warnock, he took us to church. I was very impressed by that speech. That was really cool. And then to your point, Hillary Clinton, oh my gosh, former Secretary of State and 2016 presidential candidate, Democratic presidential candidate. She received quite the standing ovation. I mean, it lasted for a long time. You would think, well, where was that support for her in 2016? Yeah. And now, granted, she did win the popular vote, but she lost the Electoral College. So, but to see, and I have a theory on Clinton that that a woman had to lose in order for another woman to win. We had to go through. It was almost like she was a building block. She was a stepping stone.
I'd go with that.
It was one of those type of situations. And who better than a Hillary Clinton? Somebody who we're very familiar with her work. But at the same time, to see her endorse Harris in such a graceful way. I think that was, I like a girl's girl, you know what I mean? Yeah. So, and she didn't give any kind of hater energy. So, and again, it's all about enthusiasm and building the party. And the party is just seeming very moved right now. The Democratic Party, they definitely have some movement behind Harris that is absolutely amazing. And going back to the second night, wow. Yeah. How can you follow Michelle Obama? Because listen, she probably should have headlines. Okay.
Yeah. That's what I'm hearing. Yeah.
And she probably should have headlined. And especially looking at all of that, ironically enough, on the Breakfast Club this morning, Charlemagne mentioned that, all the women have had the fiery speeches outside of Warnock. Of course, Warnock had a really good speech, but he was like, he wasn't too impressed with Obama. I like Obama's speech. Obama doesn't hoot and holler, and the way that maybe some of the others do, but he comes off a little suave, a little demure, and very mindful. And so, with that being said, I think his speech, it translated well to the crowd. I mean, there were boos, and then his things. He honed in on a lot of his sayings, like "Don't boo, vote." Yeah. His campaign slogan was "Yes, we can," and he switched that up to "Yes, she can," talking about Kamala Harris and things of that nature. And then, he took some jabs at Trump too. It was talking about his... Yeah,
I saw that. The crowd size, but he was using his hands.
His hands.
Yeah.
So I thought that was really cool. Obama is always coming with the minuscule clapbacks. You got to read into them. But very suave. Way and debonair the way that he spoke, but Michelle Obama, she was fired up, especially when she said, who's gonna tell him that one of those jobs that he's looking for might just be a black job. So I thought, the crowd was hype. It was very packed. You know how it's so packed to get hot? Yeah, it was like that in there. So on one hand, I'm like, ooh, get away from me. It's, try to cool off. But on the other hand, it's like you could feel the energy in that room. So that was amazing.
That's fantastic. Now, obviously, these are Democrats who are, on the national stage, all the people that we've been speaking about so far, from obviously Michelle Obama, Bernie Sanders, Jasmine Crockett, Raphael Warnock, AOC. There have been a couple of folks on the stage. One individual named John Giles, I believe, or Giles, who is a mayor in Arizona. And he's been a very vocal supporter of a Harris presidency, although he is a Republican. And he was on the ground in Glendale, Arizona, when Kamala Harris stopped. I was actually at that rally, myself and Q Ward. So we got a chance to hear him speak. And my understanding is that he had some words out there as well. But the Republican of the day was Stephanie Grisham, who was Trump's press secretary. So I have a quote from her speech. and she says, I wasn't just a Trump supporter. I was a true believer. I was one of his closest advisors. The Trump family became my family. She said she spent her holidays at Mar-a-Lago. She goes on to say, I saw him when the cameras were off. Trump mocks his supporters. He calls them basement dwellers. On a hospital visit one time when people were dying in the ICU, he was mad that the cameras were not watching him. So just eviscerating this guy, taking him down. And I think that shows a lot of, well, that shows what a lot of Republicans who are not necessarily MAGA Republicans are frustrated about with that president and this candidate. And so maybe talk to us a little bit about how that landed in the room and what the response from the Democrats has been. You know, are people still talking about this? You know, whatever comes to mind.
Oh, absolutely. You know, at first she wasn't met with the most welcoming, that's the most welcome. But I will say that once she started to say what she was saying, those quotes that you mentioned, you know, the crowd certainly came around and they were supportive. She expressed that she is supportive of Kamala Harris, and that Kamala Harris has her vote. She also said that Trump told her that if, you know, you say something so many times or you say something
I remember
enough, you know, people will begin to believe that. And so she brought, I think, excellent insight into who Trump is personally. Obama, and during his speech, he also mentioned that, you know, Trump is very self-absorbed, very self-centered. You know, he's very concerned with himself. So to see the theme across the different speeches kind of play out that way, and especially in a bipartisan way, someone who has, to your point, Stephanie Grisham's, you know, she's a Republican, lifelong Republican, it's very insightful. And I think it's very necessary. And I'm glad that she used this platform to speak, because it does provide the people with an insight that I don't think, you know, the Democratic Party would have had she not stepped up and done it. So I commend her for that. But yes, it didn't start off so great, but yes, the room definitely warmed up to her after the fact, and knowing that, okay, she's standing with Harris.
Fantastic. Well, some of the other highlights is, you know, the Republican National Convention was the Republican National Convention, and it was a party in its own right. And I'm not going to downplay that. But when I saw Lil Jon performing, I'm like, okay, this is different, you know, and I know that Common performed too. So, you know, talk to us a little bit about kind of the energy in the room when these things were happening and people's response to that.
So I cannot speak to that because I was not in the room at that point. I arrived a little later.
Okay.
But I will tell you that the timelines, the social media, everything was very excited to see that. And that was a different kind of roll call. You know, that was for Georgia. So when you're doing a roll call, and I think I like that they're doing things differently. You know, it's not traditional. And I think that speaks to the movement of the party. And I think that speaks to the movement of America and the nation and where we are right now. Biden literally passing the torch because, you know, they beat him down. You're old, you're unfit, you're old. And now here you have this young energy, you know, whether it's Lil Jon or Megan Thee Stallion, you know, however it is, it's, you know, you're reaching. And I think that Harris and the Democratic Party are trying to really, truly reach Americans where they're at, and get that message across in just the most artistic way. And and I think that's cool. I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. So yeah,
there you go. Yeah. So check this out. And I don't know how true this is because again, I got this from the timeline, you know, my timelines, but some of my, you know, I'm a DJ. So some of my DJ friends were like, okay, I see a DJ on stage, they're in touch. And that type of thing, a Common performance, a Lil Jon performance, a Megan Thee Stallion performance, as you mentioned the other day. Those things are almost inconceivable if Biden is running. It just doesn't fit. It's awkward. It's shoehorning. It's forcing it. And with
it's probably seen as pandering too.
Exactly. And with Kamala Harris, you get to take advantage of that connective tissue that exists between young people and the Democratic Party. And so
Absolutely.
them using not only the moment, but using the resources that they have now because of the moment, the shift in the optics and the shift in the nominee. We don't even really have to use colorful language here, just the shift in the nominee. As you mentioned earlier in the conversation, it just breathed new life into the Democrat and really the political establishment, top to bottom.
Yeah.
Because there are people that under no circumstances would they have ever voted for Joe Biden, because whether or not there's a Democrat or a Republican in the office, they want someone who is capable of running the country in their minds. So it doesn't matter who it is, because they'll be fine. This is what they think. There's some people that are like this. Well, they would not vote for Joe Biden because they felt like he was not capable of doing that. But they did not love the idea of voting for Trump because he was incapable too. He just happened to be more capable than Joe Biden in their opinion.
Right.
And now with Kamala Harris, and then the excitement around Kamala Harris, these same folks are looking at it like, okay, well, this feels better. This feels like something we can be excited about. Not like we have to dread one over the other, but this feels like something we can be excited about. You know, as I mentioned in a recent social media post, if decency was the minimum standard for electing an official, just decency, we have one candidate who forget policies, forget, whatever. We have one candidate who is a felon, convicted. We have one candidate who was found liable for sexual assault and has a history of accusations going back to the 70s. We have one candidate who is on record saying, you can walk up to him and grab him by the P word. This is, and then all of the other things that the people say around.
The vets are losers and suckers. Like
all the above, right? And then we have one candidate who just didn't do any of that. And if the minimum standard was just decency, Kamala Harris wins alone. And so not only do those people who just wanted a capable leader get that in a Kamala Harris campaign, but they also get the excitement and the fanfare and the participation of youthful, jovial type of energy, a la Lil Jon, Common, Megan Thee Stallion, all these other celebrities and celebrated individuals who make this great art and really define the culture. And to see their excitement behind Kamala Harris, I think that it's infectious. And so it's interesting to see that decision that Joe Biden made ultimately was the right decision. And if his legacy was a one-term president, I guess the jewel in that crown is that he paved the way for what many people are hoping will be the first female president of the United States of America, because that will tack right on to Joe Biden's 50-year political legacy very easily. Now, we do have to switch gears a bit here because it hasn't all been positive. As I mentioned, we do have to talk about the protests, and there are a lot of people who've been, again, very critical of Joe Biden's presidency, certainly over the last year and some change. So speak to kind of what that energy has been like, what it's been like on the streets outside of the convention, and maybe interruptions. Protesters are there to interrupt and to disrupt, and I'm a protester myself, and I kind of like that energy. So speak to that a little bit. What's been going on the streets?
Well, there's nothing wrong with a little good trouble, necessary trouble, John Lewis. But I will say that it's been from my perspective minimal. You might not know it's a protest unless you really see them with the signs, because it could just look like a crowd headed, walking across the street. Because it's a bunch of foot traffic around here anyways. And close to where the United Center is, I believe it's Madison Street in Chicago. There have been some protests, and there have been some police lines where they've, they're shoulder to shoulder, making sure that the protesters don't break that line. And I think for the most part, the protests have been peaceful, which is what the Chicago officials, the mayor and the governor have been saying, or Illinois governor have been saying, that's fine. You're welcome to peacefully protest. Now, I do believe that if it was Monday night, there was word reportedly that there was a breach of some sort of gate, but it was again very minimal. And these gates are blocks away from the United Center, so I believe that that situation was handled and tactfully, and it wasn't in, there were no parties hurt. And I also understand that yesterday there was protests outside the Israeli consulate. But I will say that as much as there are protests, we're also seeing pro-Palestinians in the convention space, having the conversations, talking to congressional leaders, and just, they're calling for the ceasefires. They're making their demands and they're making their voices heard. So I think that to that point that I made earlier, it's a little trouble, but it's good trouble, necessary trouble.
Sure.
And I believe that nobody wants to deal with war. And so it's just a matter of figuring out what can be done to resolve that. And honestly, I'm not sure that it's kind of crazy because, Israel is our ally, but we can't force them, so it's just a matter of those conversations needing to be had. But I think all parties don't want to participate in the demise of people on either side,
It's funny because I had a house guest last night, a friend of mine. He's an older gentleman, and he's a lawyer, and he's Jewish, very Jewish. And he was in town last night. I invited him to come stay with me, hang out with me and my boy. And, we ended up talking about that. And obviously being a Jewish man and a lawyer, and someone who is interested in politics and political outcomes, he had a lot to say about the United States' position and Kamala Harris's position and Donald Trump's, or the country's position, because there are many people that would argue that Kamala Harris's platform would not be too dissimilar to Donald Trump's platform either way, and so no voting is the best way to show, how they feel, right?
Yeah, there are a lot of
Right. And so, he and I got into a conversation. I won't rehash the whole thing, but suffice it to say that is a sticky position to be in. I remember when Kamala Harris was in Glendale, Arizona, and doing her rally, and she was actually interrupted by protesters, the chant that we all know now, free, free Palestine. And she actually took a moment to address the crowd, which I thought was a brilliant move, not just strategically and politically, but in terms of being a human being and acknowledging that these people are trying to fight to save lives, because there are some people that feel like death must happen in order to get the outcomes that we want to save the lives that we value. And there are other people that feel like no death needs to happen. We need to figure this out using other diplomatic solutions, right? And those people, their morals are based in some people would argue that they're based in delusion, but I feel like all people who have that type of moral center deserve to be heard, because if their plight is, hey, look, no one else needs to die, I think that's something that at its core everyone can get on board with. And so the fact that Kamala Harris took a moment to say, look, I plan on calling for a ceasefire, so forth, and then obviously the next day the United States is offering more aid and more weapons to Israel, sends a conflicting message. But, as I mentioned, it's kind of a sticky situation. Every conversation, from the conversation in my living room to indeed the conversations that those folks who are actually inside the DNC and having those tough conversations are having, they are tough to have. But I appreciate the fact that Democrats are at least willing to engage. From what I've seen with Kamala Harris and what you're telling me right now, there are people who are actually having conversations inside the DNC. So I'm not the sort of person where I can't pretend like that isn't happening. I've actually sat and talked with people in this studio whose family members are affected by this war, who people are missing that they know, Jewish people and Palestinian people. And so it's something that I had to bring up. But I think it's time for us to conclude. So tell us a little bit about maybe the overall message from the DNC, and I guess a final thought from you. A lot of folks were speculating that this would give Kamala Harris another boost. So far in the DNC, has it been well executed, energizing, et cetera? Do you think that it will culminate in the additional boost in terms of poll numbers, in terms of popularity, in terms of momentum that many people are hoping for?
I do. I absolutely do. And the sentiment is to vote. Young, old, indifferent, however however you identify, whatever the case may be, vote. And that has been the theme, I think. Vote like your life depends on it, because it might be your last time, per the other candidates, basically what Trump said. If if you vote this one time, you might not have we'll fix it. You'll never have to do it again.
Yeah.
So the theme has been across the board, from the speeches to the exclusives that the people I've run up and talked to. It's just been to vote and tell a friend to tell a friend to vote. And it's okay to, do some research. You might not like everything you hear about a candidate, and you might not like everything you hear about the other candidate, but you do have to do your research and then just get out there and cast your vote. But just, not voting is just not going to, it's not going to help anything. And so back to Obama's point, don't boo if something doesn't go your way. Make sure you cast your ballot and you vote. Yeah.
I love it. I love it. All right. Well, that is your midweek memo. Of course, I'd like to thank you for all the exclusive content. Once again, Morgyn Wood of the Black Information Network, on the ground at the Democratic National Convention at the United Center in Chicago, Illinois. Thank you so much for your time and your insight.
Thank you, Ramses. Anytime, I'll be here for you.
This has been a production of the Black Information Network. Today's show was produced by Chris Thompson. Have some thoughts you'd like to share? Use the red microphone talkback feature on the iHeartRadio app. While you're there, be sure to hit subscribe and download all of our episodes. I am your host, Ramses Ja, on all social media. And join us tomorrow as we share our news with our voice, from our perspective, right here on the Black Information Network Daily Podcast.